Assalamu alaikum. You're listening to the New Beginnings podcast. No fluff, no holding back. Just honest conversations about your journey as a new Muslim.
Brought to you by New Beginnings, a platform that aims to support new Muslims on their journey through Islam, from the Shahada and beyond. Assalamu alaikum to all of our listeners. This is your host, Bilal Brown. Welcome to another episode of the New Beginnings podcast.
And I'm your other host, Amanda. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're looking at the issue of Islamic etiquette, including gender interactions, which I know is something a lot of converts may struggle to get to grips with in the early years.
Yes, it's definitely a topic that many people misunderstand. And here to help us unpack it, our brother Ahmed from Preston and sister Zahra from Manchester. Welcome to you both.
Alaikum, Jazakallah khair for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so before we get into the main topic, could you each introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your journeys to, and actually within Islam, because I think we've all been Muslim a number of years, mashallah. Zahra, let's start with you, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah, I have been a Muslim for 11 years now, although it feels like a minute. I grew up Irish Catholic, so you can imagine that was a bumpy ride for the conversion process. But I came to Islam through work at the time because I was working for a Muslim company, and then soon after I converted, just because I was in criminal defence, which for the topic of this involved a lot of free mixing, and I left that career completely just so that I could have some time for a reset by myself. Since then, new career, and over the years been involved in a number of convert support groups, the Converts in Conversation podcast, the Convert Sister Club in-person breakfast club, and recently appointed to the advisory board for the National Muslim Women's group, which is amazing.
MashaAllah. Thank you for coming on. And I should say that last weekend, I was able to join Zahra and the other sisters at the Convert Sisters Breakfast Club, which was really, really lovely. Lovely to see the work that you guys are doing there, mashallah. May Allah make it successful. Brother Ahmed, shall we hear from you next, please?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Ahmed. I'm from Preston. I'm from African Caribbean heritage. In particular, the island that we come from is an island called Dominica. I came to Islam maybe over 25 years ago, and I came to Islam, I suppose I was taught by a colleague who I worked with at the time, who was from Nigeria. And Preston is a small town or a small city, if you will, but it is quite diverse for the population that is here as well. So I learned a lot of Islam from him. And we traveled to different parts of the UK to learn from various scholars and teachings. I've also been out to Africa, in particular Sudan as well, and learned there as well. I suppose that's me in a nutshell. But yes, I've been involved in various support groups for converts as well. I remember I suppose one of the highlights I would say that in my journey whilst I've been supporting converts is when we had the Eid party, which was inviting the non-Muslim family members within that as well, so that they could partake in the activities and see what we do and how we get along and how we celebrate and how we remember and celebrate Eid, if you will. So yeah, so I've done various activities, and I still do as well, still involved a great deal in supporting a lot of converts on a one-to-one basis.
MashaAllah, great. Jazakallah khair for sharing with us. Thank you both. So MashaAllah, as you're both very experienced converts, I'm sure you'll have some great reflection on today's topic. So let's get to it.
Let's start with some Islamic etiquette in general. How do we all understand the term adab or this term Islamic etiquette? So if we describe someone as having good manners or good adab, what does this mean to us?
I think for me, it goes hand in hand with faith, and it's part of everything that we do. It's our lifestyle. It's how we deal in business, how we deal in conflict, maybe how we treat each other, manners, kindness, appropriateness, and the way we respect others in any kind of social, professional, religious encounters.
I think for me, I think the key word that comes across for me is about respect, and respecting an individual regardless who it is. When we hear about adabs and etiquette towards any person or anything as well, because everything it requires a great deal of respect or adab, and I think that that's the key word that comes across for me when I hear the word Islamic adab. And your faith, it can be up, it can be down, but regardless, we should all ultimately maintain that level of respect for any individual at any time, regardless of what situation. And I think that's something that there's almost like two elements that sort of go hand in hand. And I think that they should be maintained throughout life or any duration that you interact with anybody or anything.
I like how you've both brought in this term of respect. And I think that a lot of people would agree with that. One thing that I struggled with when I was new all those years ago was the cultural differences, though, and weeding out what was culturally good etiquette and what was Islamically good etiquette. And I really, really struggled with that because I was being told that what was perfectly fine for me culturally was bad manners. And none of it was disrespectful. None of it was, I'll tell you a really random example once. This happened to me, and it's happened to other sisters I know, this issue of when you have guests, what do you serve them and when? And if you serve the wrong thing at the wrong time, and being, really born into for serving coffee too early in the evening kind of thing, because culturally it sends a message as opposed to Islamically what's acceptable. And I always thought, well, but at the time my guest was asking for coffee, so it would have been disrespectful to not honor that. Do you know what I mean? So I always find these issues they can be very, very touchy. And I'd love to hear if any of us have shared, have had any of these sort of encounters in terms of like a concrete example of what is good etiquette Islamically vis-a-vis culturally, or even within our own cultures, things that we might consider.
I was refused cutlery once because apparently Muslims don't use them. It's better to eat with your hands. And I thought, come on, give me a break. Like, I've never eaten, like, I can eat chips or something, but please don't tell me about to serve me up soup or something gloopy. Like, I'm really going to struggle here. But it was rice and meat, and I just thought, these are people that I've never really met before. Like, I'll give it a go, but this ain't going to be pretty. And I'm sure that this is bad manners to just start throwing food into the direction of my face. So yeah, that was probably the first example that comes to mind I'm not sure that not refusing to give me a spoon was the best of manners in a new environment.
I'm sure I could draw many of examples of that I've experienced in my time as well, and many similar to what you guys, but sometimes I had to override it, and I just think to myself, am I being rude, or is it just from their perspective that they see it as rude? And I thought, well, you know what? All my life, it's never been viewed as something that's been disrespectful within the culture that I come from. And I thought, well, I'm here now, and I think that I'm going to have to bring an element of me and my culture with me. And it's not with disrespect that I mean it or anything like that. It's just, it was respect then. And this is my norm now. So really, I suppose I have to throw it back on them in my mentality. And I think that the problem's with you now. So it's about you understanding my cultural norms and the way that I do and how I'm showing you respect. And this is respect from my perspective. So I struggled with that at the time. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to maintain it because it wasn't a problem at the time, but I'm going to maintain that because it is respect and I'm showing you respect. If you don't understand, I'll explain it to you why we do this. But I'm a Muslim and this is my heritage and this is my culture and this is me showing you respect from my perspective. So I'm keeping that. And I know that some people may not have liked it or may have their views on it, but I'm just going to keep it. So
yeah, alhamdulillah, I think that's probably been all of our conclusions at the end of this. But, back in the 90s, that wasn't the done thing. The done thing was, no, you've got to get rid of all of your culture and adopt the Islamic culture, right? So, Bilal, what about your experiences?
I've had, many experiences, and encourage people to refer back to our podcast on Islam and culture for more details about this topic. We know that Islam doesn't come to obliterate people's cultures, and some of that may, part of that might be, the different etiquettes that each culture adheres to. So it's a very, very difficult one, even for religious scholars, decipher what is actually from the religion and what is commendable in religion and what is actually just part of people's culture.
So actually, that brings us on to our next question. We are referring now to Islamic etiquette specifically. So not things like when do you serve the fruit and when do you serve the tea versus the coffee and all of that, but actually religiously mandated, I guess, if that's the word, etiquette. Is there any guidance in the Quran or in the Hadith about this? Like, is there anything that Allah says or the Messenger, peace be upon him, says that we should be implementing in our lives?
Yeah, there will be things that are religious, and it's a difficult task again for religious scholars to differentiate what is actually just a general practice of the Prophet ﷺ and what is a religious practice. So there may be things like sitting down when urinating, or there'll be strict and clear guidance from the Messenger of Allah, like don't you using your right hand to relieve yourself or eating with the right hand. So when there are strict and clear texts about these matters, and yes, we can say this is a religious matter, but then there are some things the Messenger of Allah did. They were just part of his day-to-day practice, but not religiously mandated. So it might be the style of dress that he wore, or the type of sandals. And there's an incident where the Messenger of Allah goes into the mosque and he removes his sandals, and he never used to remove the sandals in Medina because it was just like a dusty floor with palm tree leaves on the floor. But this time the Messenger of Allah removes his sandals, and then everybody behind him removes the sandals as well. And then after the prayer, he says, why did you all remove your sandals for the prayer? And he said, well, we saw you removing your sandals. And he says, well, that's because Gabriel told me there were some impurities on them, and that's why I removed them. So we know that not every single action that the Messenger of Allah does is actually religiously mandated for us to do as well. So it's, about where we draw the line.
Yeah, I was going to say that, and then because I know that a lot of the things that the Prophet did, peace and blessings be upon him, did in the time, it was relative to the Arabian culture and Arabian society as well. So it's what we take from that and enhance and put in our society as well. I remember in particular, one of my friends, when he became a Muslim, and he was from America, and I don't know how he ended up there, but he was in Bradford, living in Bradford. And he used to wear some of the cultural norms of the American clothing, and it was very baggy clothing in the 90s and things like that. And we went to see one of the teachers in London. And I remember him, the teacher he was saying to the teacher, all the community are telling us, I need to wear this shirt, this long camise, and the traditional Asian clothes. Why do I have to wear this? And he was struggling with it because this was him. This was part of his culture. He says the Prophet emphasized that we wear baggy, loose-fitting clothing, if you will. And so what you're wearing is good. So the Americans were sort of ultimately wearing some sort of a relative thing to the sunnah, if you will. So he was happy with that, and he was reassured with that. So it was something that was drawn from the time of the Prophet that he was wearing within the society and the time that he's in now. So I just think that sometimes common sense needs to be applied sometimes in some of these cases, I think.
I find it really interesting when I see different people from different cultures, and I think that they pick up different bits and follow different behaviours from the Prophet. That's how I've learned a lot, especially because I often go to mosques where it's different cultures and different ethnicities, and each of them will sort of do something like the squatting down when drinking something rather than drinking while standing up. I didn't I'd never knew what that was before. And people say, well, it's just good manners. You're not supposed to stand when you drink it. But each of these things, when you see different people behaving in different ways, is the way I've then gone on to read something and learn something new about the Prophet ﷺ. And I just think there's a beauty in it. And if people are following as much as they possibly can, then it's not making life easier for them. In some ways, it's making it harder, but there's such a beauty in it. I struggle sometimes, I certainly struggle to be consistent with some of these things, because I'm sure we'll get onto it later, that depending on the environment at the time, it's sometimes easier to navigate some of these changes in lifestyle and how our manners come across. But yeah, one thing that came to mind when you were talking about the Americans was how trendy it is now to have trousers that are slightly above the ankles for men and a beard. I think if you go around the northern quarter in Manchester, it looks like everyone's a Muslim now, but actually they're just trendy hipsters.
I think one of my issues was with regards to manners and to knowing like what everything can be labeled as sunnah if there's a hadith to support it. But which ones are the sunnahs that we should be implementing? And which ones are the ones, like the example, Sheikh, that you gave about the sandals, that he had a reason for doing that. It doesn't mean we have to do it, because they're all ostensibly sunnah. So which of those, how do we know as new Muslims when we're new, or even now, let's be honest, even after all of these years, sometimes I think, how am I supposed to differentiate between what's a sunnah that I should be doing? The one that surprised me was about like breaking your fast with dates, because I've 25 years, I've been breaking my fast with dates. And if I don't have dates, I'm like, gosh, I need to go out and buy some dates. And it's almost like, I know that it's not, it's valid to not break my fast with dates. I'm perfectly aware of that, but it's sort of like, this is the best food. And then I attended one of your classes and you're like, no, anything sweet will do. Any fruit will do. And I thought, what? So like raisins? I could break my fast with a banana, and it's still following the sunnah. So how do we know this? This is a bit that I really, until now, struggle to get my head around, to be honest.
We do have these different opinions as well about so many different, matters, if it's the beard or standing whilst drinking. There's great scholars that said there's absolutely nothing wrong with standing whilst drinking, and it's not commendable to sit down, and many other topics. There's a huge flexibility in them, in the religion. So unless we're speaking about something that is obligatory for us to do or strictly prohibited, you'll usually find there's lots of flexibility.
So basically, don't sweat it, is what you're saying. Don't sweat the small things. Okay, alhamdulillah. So let's move on to our second topic, which is really just a subset of the etiquette issue. And that's about gender interactions, which for a lot of new Muslims I have contact with, this is a major issue to come to terms with. And I'm sure you would all agree.
Let's hear from our guests. So when you first became Muslim, how did you find this issue of gender interactions?
For me, it was completely alien, so foreign to try and get used to. I think from a woman, so I'd come from a career in criminal defence where it was quite male heavy. And so a lot of my interactions, certainly professionally, less so personally, had been with males. So then to start going into a mosque where people were refusing to look me in the eye when they were talking to me, I found it super rude. And they were sort of scurrying away when I was talking to them, or standing almost side on as if they were disgusted. And I suppose part of my imposter syndrome was creeping in at that point. And I think I originally, without any knowledge about what was happening, thought that it was that they too thought that I was an imposter. And that's why I was getting the cold shoulder and that they were refusing to look at me. But then I started asking, what's going on? And someone explained it. I was like, aha, I get it. Okay, so it's a respect thing. And then I started looking into it and appreciating it, and decided that whilst I could probably get on board with that and navigate it easily within a mosque setting, how to navigate it outside of the mosque might be a little trickier for me. Ahmed, what about you?
Well, this was mad difficult because for me, it was like, I'm used to talking to anybody from any gender and we're all getting along and we're all talking. The moment I become a Muslim, then like the women just, I used to talk to before, are not allowed to talk to me. Then they weren't allowed to look my way. And it just got mad confusing. And then on top of that, it was like, oh, you're a new Muslim. So it was like they were throwing you the mad respect, and it's like they've got to respect you the most. And so they show the best elements of themselves. But then I would see like other converts who had learned, maybe, let's say they'd learned Gujarati. The guy would come out the mosque and he would speak to the woman like they were like brother and sister, and she'd converted to Islam, but because she could speak Gujarati, it was just a real head mess up, and I was just really confused. So it was just, I think the cultural thing, the side of it, I think it really did just really confuse me. And what I decided, I just thought, those who aren't Muslim anyway, I continued with the conversation that I had with them as well and things like that. So I didn't stop those conversations. And those who were Muslim, it just, okay, I didn't talk to them as much, or I didn't talk to them and things like that. And it was just really difficult to understand that. And it was really difficult. So So I respected them. I didn't, enforce myself to push those conversations and things like that. But I just found it really, really, really strange. And I suppose from their perspective, that's how they are showing their respect. So I then respect that within their circles. But I didn't understand it, but I gave the respect.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with both of you. For me, it was strange because like growing up, I'm not going to say growing up, but like sort of from late high school, university age, I had very few female friends. Most of my friends were guys. And it was simply because maybe this is something to do with my community. I don't want to generalize, but most of the women who I knew, I felt I couldn't trust. There was a real element of cattiness, of backstabbing, of competition. It's like you were in competition constantly. And I didn't have time for that. I was doing my degree and wanting to get on with things. And it was just easier to deal with men my age because they weren't in competition with me for anything. And I realized in hindsight how naive that was, because obviously there were other issues, and I did have a few run-ins where I was having to tell people who I thought were my friends that was all that they were friend zoned, which is obviously awkward and can be an unintended consequence of that. But so when I came to Islam, one of the things that really attracted me was the respect afforded to women. And then also the fact that I could, I met Muslim women who I could actually form like not just friendships with, but sisterhood with. And that was a whole new thing. And I really, really loved that. Alhamdulillah. But the whole issue of, well, now you can't talk to any men when half of my existing friends were men, that really threw me. And it took me a long time to sort of cut those individuals. I don't want to say I didn't cut them out of my life. I'm still, at least Facebook friends with many of them, but just sort of reduce the amount of communication and to reduce the nature of the communication, stop being so jokey, stop asking personal questions and things like that, and sort of like wean them out of my personal life kind of thing. But it was hard. And it was hard to sort of understand why.
Yeah.
I find that really intriguing, because I'm thinking now, you see, because I'm a man and you guys are women, and it's like you've got those challenges anyway outside of Islam, but now inside of Islam, you've brought some challenges in terms of those gender interactions within Islam. It's just really profound to hear it from your point of view, and I never really sort of unpicked it. I never thought about it because I'm a man. I'm thinking, okay, well, we can talk to women, but then when you're a convert or you're a Muslim now and you're talking to men as before, there's a whole different sort of relationship there and a dynamic as well. So I never really thought about that. And until you said that, Amanda, you just talked about that, how you had to change those relationships for those who were not Muslim, whereas I didn't have to. That's really profound. I never really thought of that as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Sorry, I was just thinking then while you were talking that with even Muslim men that I'd been friends with before I was a Muslim, the way I used to greet people for most of my life was to hug and do a cheek kiss. And even now when I approach people in my head, I have to actively go, don't hug them, because I can't help it. I'm a hugger. But I found that as soon as I became Muslim, before the Muslim men that I knew before I'd converted, that is how I used to greet them. And they were fine with it. There was never any issue. Then as soon as they found out I was Muslim, whoa, like, no, that's not how we do it. And obviously I was also like, yeah, that's not going to happen. But it was a really strange shift. And I find that it was, well, actually now, if I bumped into someone who I knew when I was 16, 20, whatever, that was a non-Muslim, no doubt I would get a hug. I can't stop it. I don't even see it coming. But for Muslims, it doesn't happen anymore. But yeah, that was a strange shift to try and actively stop hugging people. So now I over-hug sisters. So they just have to deal with that.
You compensate, hey? Yeah, the hugging. I mean, like I'm at sort of this stage now, I won't even shake someone's hand. And, which a lot of people think, oof, that's a bit extreme, but it's like, well, that's my boundary. I won't shake anybody's hand. But then, I've got people who I work with, for example, because I work for a mainstream organization, not a Muslim organization. And like, obviously we're all working virtually. The first time we actually met in person, my manager looked like he wanted to give me a hug, but clearly my body language gave something away and he didn't even try. But it's like, there's always that thing where they're going to try and give you a hug or try and shake your hand. And it's like, okay, no, I'm not going to do this. And that's, well, we can talk about how do we handle it later. It's a later question, but I'd like to hear, Bilal, your experiences.
I didn't have any female friends really that are like close friends. All of my friends were male anyway. When I converted, I was only 20. But yeah, later on, just, interacting with females at work and not shaking hands, like you said, and hugging, and then having to make up some type of excuse for not doing that as well. And, you ask different scholars, how do we navigate this? And, they try and give you different ways out. So it is, very, very difficult. And obviously, in our culture, it's eye contact with people as well. But then we're trying to lower our gaze as well. So yeah, just navigating it was quite difficult.
I want to touch on what you said about lowering your gaze. So when I first converted, I was at university in London. Like this was 97, 98. So, there was a particular school of thought that was prevalent in universities in London at the time that was like really quite strict. And a lot of the brothers on campus took the lowering your gaze thing very literally. Like they would be staring at their shoes while having a conversation with somebody. And I know that what bugged me about it, honestly, was the inconsistency of it. If they were talking to somebody who wasn't Muslim, they were making the eye contact because it's rude not to. But when they were talking to me, they were looking at their shoes, which to me was rude because, I'm from that culture and I'm new to all of this. And I was like, what's going on? And I mean, should we be taking it literally? Or is it, to me, it just means just don't stare at somebody, just avert your gaze. You can, to me, I can look like I'm making eye contact and not actually be making eye contact. Do you know what I mean? And it just sort of, I'd like to know, how was this idea presented to you? How did you understand it? How do you understand it now?
Like with you, it varies, and there's been a real lack of consistency. And especially when you can see that someone isn't the same person isn't consistent depending on who they're talking to, it's difficult. But then I suppose on the flip side, I think about it and think, well, maybe I'm not all that consistent either, because depending on what circumstance I'm in, certainly with the handshake thing, going back to what you said, so I would never put my hand out to shake a man's hand ever. Muslim, non-Muslim, it doesn't matter, I wouldn't do it. In work, if a professional, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, I would hope not for a Muslim, but it happens in the healthcare industry. But if a non-Muslim man on first meeting me put his hand out to shake it, would I in that instance go, no, sorry? I'm not sure that I would. I can't actually recall a recent incident where it's happened, but I'm not sure that out of manners, I would reject him and make him feel awkward in that moment. And inside my head just going, and so asking for forgiveness instead, because that too is manners. And I'm sure that there's different opinions on whether that's the right thing or not to do. But then that's my lack of consistency too, I suppose. And so I do get that you change how you interact with people depending on the circumstance. But yeah, the lowering your gaze inconsistency was difficult, definitely very early on, because it was a bit of a head wreck in the first place.
I think the lowering the gaze, and this is another interesting one, because it very much is about, I suppose, the dynamics of that situation. Because from a male perspective, I mean, yeah, you kind of have to lower your gaze, but I think what I understand by it is refraining from things which maybe you shouldn't be looking at, and how you look at it. But looking at somebody in the eyes is nothing to me. It's not like it doesn't suggest, it's not suggestive or anything like that for me. It's how it's done and where you're looking as well for me, and that's what I understand or interpret from that. But also at the same time, within African Caribbean culture, to look at somebody who is your elder as well isn't very good to look at them. You kind of have to look down. That's respect as well. That's also shown, or I highlight as a respect, because if you look at somebody who's your elder, you're like, well, you're looking at me for, you're looking at me in my eye for, it's kind of disrespect. So you're taught to look down within a lot of the African Caribbean families as well. But looking at eye contact, it's nothing. It's communication. And I think that there's nothing wrong with it, but it's about how you look at that and where you look at it. And I think that's something that we need, men and women probably need to keep in check and things like that. It also depends in terms of that respect, in terms of how you convey yourself with other genders as well. It does very much depend on the space that you're in and the environment that you are. And I don't have any problem with that, really. I will, accommodate due to the situation. And one of the things that comes across when it comes right back to adab. It's about respect, because that person may not understand the reason why I'm doing such a thing, because I come from a Muslim perspective. Why am I going to enforce it on them without any understanding, and for them to perceive it as being rude? So I wouldn't do that. So I would do it in a way that they would understand it, because ultimately I'm meaning respect from their cultural perspective.
I think on the issue of shaking hands, there was a time when, obviously this is before COVID, when we were doing a lot of like open days in the mosque and things like that, inviting non-Muslims in. And we had a journalist come in to do some reporting on the open day. And one of my colleagues greeted her, and she immediately stuck her hand out to shake his hand. And I really liked the way he handled it, because he's really strict. He won't shake a non-Mahram's hand. Muslim, non-Muslim, he doesn't care, right? And he's quite on that. And he just put his hand to his chest and went, "I don't have the right to shake your hand out of respect." And she was like, she looked a little bit offended, and he said, it's out of respect. Unless you're actually related to me, I am not worthy of shaking your hand. And I thought, okay, that is a way to put it that I think a lot of Western women would appreciate, because fact of the matter is, people think they have the right to touch us. And subhanAllah, this brother saying to her, no, I haven't got the right to touch you. You could see the cogs turning in her head, how it was presented. And I really wish, like, when it was presented to me early on, it wasn't presented to me like that. It was presented to me that, like, it was very hypersexualized, that it's temptation, that it's fitna, it's going to cause problems, it's going to cause, illicit feelings and all of that stuff. And I was thinking, well, shaking your hand. Whereas the way this brother put it was, I'm not worthy of shaking your hand even. And I thought, see, that's a way better way to put it, out of respect. And we've been talking, the theme of respect keeps coming up, subhanAllah. And I think a lot of people present it wrong, present it in a way that's just a little bit, distasteful to me.
And I think it might come back down to the person who's actually informed you of that, probably doesn't truly have an understanding themselves, you see, and that's one of the problems
Absolutely.
as well.
That's a really nice and gentle and respectful way for a man to reject the handshake of a woman. But on the flip side, that's not something we could say without causing deep offence. I suppose if a non-Muslim shake my hand and said,
"You're not worthy.
You are not worthy enough to touch me."
Yeah, I think we need to come up with a different message.
We need to try and think of a different way around that, maybe, especially in a work environment.
Maybe.
I do like the hand on the heart, though.
Yes.
I do like that. I like that one, because I have done that a couple of times where I've just put my hand in and I said, "Oh, salam," or "How are you?" and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And I just put my hand to the heart, just showing that reverence from my heart to you and things like that. So yeah, I've done that.
Yeah, there's flexibility in these things, and like we said, the most important thing is having that respect, and that is adab and Islamic etiquette. And one of the ways some of the scholars told us is you can, if they've got clothing on, just maybe grab their arm or touch their shoulder, or because it's just skin to skin contact. And one of them suggested as well that what one of the brothers did when a woman put her hand out, he said, I promised my wife I wouldn't touch another woman, and use that as an excuse.
It only works if they're married, though. If they're not married, it's a lie. I promised my mom.
There's flexibility in these issues. Yeah, I noticed in Indian subcontinent culture, it's the custom for the older women to like stroke the top of the head of young men. Obviously, that's something that's fine in the Hanafi school if it's an older woman. So there are these differences of opinions and cultural differences and flexibility. Actually, when I first converted, I was a bit strict on this matter. And there was a sister. Her sister actually converted to Islam. We were talking to her about the Quran and whatnot. And she put her hand out to shake my hand, and I said, "Look, I can't shake your hand," and gave her. And she got really, really angry, because she's all about equality, and she like stormed off, and I don't want to speak to him again. And later on, she actually became Muslim. And she said, "I actually thought about, what Bilal did, and I've realized that he's saving himself for his wife, and he's totally for her." So sometimes, if it's explained properly, then it can be positive as well. So some of the other things we want to discuss are, how was it really presented to you in the Muslim community, this issue of gender interaction, how men and women interact? the wider Muslim community present it to you?
For me, it was in different ways, depending on, again, the environment. Nobody ever sat me down and said, FYI, this is the way it should be. I think I probably already knew about the handshaking, cheek pecking and all that. But the rest of the stuff, the lowering the gaze or the not making eye contact, the not having overly animated or overly friendly conversations. And it was really difficult at first, but then it's also being able to navigate when you're challenged, when someone corrects you in public or if someone doesn't feel sorry. And so it wasn't just the how to actually behave, but how to actually receive criticism or pushback if you step over someone else's boundary that you didn't even know was there in the first place. So it was a real minefield, to be honest. And I don't really think there's anything anyone could have told me that would have prepared me for that, because it's so complex. You just have to kind of, or for me anyway, I just had to learn on the go.
I think it was presented to me in an abrupt way that you can't talk to them. I think there was a perception of me before I became a Muslim. That's before, probably from the community, had a perception of me. And they said, right, you cannot talk to women or something like that. And a lot of my friends at the time, they were female. And there was, I've known them, some of them, since I was young in the community as well. So I really, really struggled with it. But it was like, you cannot. So I think that was a judgmental value there of me, because it was like, the characteristics of your community may be that you can't talk to any women now and stuff like that. There was always those stereotypical views from some communities. But I think I was blessed by the fact that the person who I took my Shahada with was from Nigeria. And Africans don't get down like this. The Africans are they interact a lot with the opposite gender, and just listening to them, just watching how they interact as well. Just seeing how he was with his family members, his cousins, and they've got a lot of family members as well. And, he was okay with them. And, they would just be chatting and things like that. And some of them were distant cousins. When I was in Sudan, I saw how they interacted, male and female, when they're in the shops and stuff like that. It was totally different than what I was actually told to do and how it was presented to me, how you should be. And I think that also looking at even in Senegal as well, Senegal's just totally different. And in the way they interact with them, it's still with respect. It's with love and respect as well. I would say that they don't even know. They just have this warmth towards any individual that they interact with. And I just saw that. And it's just amazing to see. And I was glad that I had that sort of opening to see that interaction. And I'm thankful for that, because if I was to stay the way that I was taught, I would really struggle, and I would abide by it. But, I don't know. That's just not me. I'm not being myself. And I found that I'm being more true to myself now, with respect to the other individual. If they didn't want to interact in that way, obviously I would respect them. But I'm not like that. But the way it was presented to me was very abrupt. You cannot, you shouldn't, don't. And I'm like, why? You just can't, you're not allowed to. And they'd reel off some hadith, they'd find something to tell me that you couldn't do something. I'm like, all right. But to me, it didn't make sense, because to them, it didn't even make sense anyway. So I just do what I do with respect and, like I say, with etiquette to the individual that I'm talking to. And I still do that now. I still maintain that now. But yeah, at the time, it was brutal the way they told me. So.
Yeah, I think I'd echo that. I think when I was at uni in London, it was very strict, and it was very obviously this topic intersects a lot with the topic of hijab, and for men and for women, the your behavioral hijab, as it were. And there I was at uni, and I'd go to a talk, and there would be the curtain separating, and if the sheikh is up at the front, you can't even see him. You want to ask a question, you're passed out little bits of paper, and he may or may not answer them. And sometimes you'd have a TV screen and you could see him look at the question and go and throw it aside. And okay, well, I'm not getting an answer to that one, kind of, and it was very, very, I found it very demeaning as a woman who had always had access to education, and to suddenly be sequestered behind that bit of fabric sort of thing. But then I moved to Birmingham. and I met the Somali community in Birmingham. And, mashallah, these sisters who were wearing clothing that was more concealing than anything I'd ever come across in London. They had the khimar that went all the way down to their knees. They had their abaya on underneath and everything. And yet they were interacting and they were talking. And, you could tell when they were with families who they knew well, they'd all be having a laugh and everything. And I thought, okay, how are they able to do that? Aren't they shy? And of course, I was married into a culture that was very much lower your gaze, don't talk in public, your voice is aura, don't look at this, don't look at that, which I found just stifling, and a lot of control elements. And yet here were these sisters who were able to respectfully interact with anyone. And I sort of had a little bit of, halal jealousy about it. Like I wanted to be able to do that too. And I respected it a lot. And I think, since I've sort of, my situation has changed, that is how I like to conduct myself. Like I have things that I'm strict about, like how I dress and shaking hands and things like that. But clearly I'm okay having conversations with members of the opposite sex. Otherwise we wouldn't be able to do this podcast. There's so many things that I wouldn't be able to do if I adopted those early views. And I did feel, and don't get me started on mosque segregation either, because that's a whole other issue. I could go off on a rant and I won't. But, I do feel that like there can be sort of this excessive stifling and this excessive, putting the blame on women for fitna, and we have to hide them away and we can't talk to them, we can't do this. And for the women as well, we're told this really awful narrative about our brothers in Islam that they can't be trusted and we have to hide ourselves away from them. And it's quite toxic in both directions, really. And I'm glad that, alhamdulillah, I'm really grateful to Allah that He got me out of that situation so I could learn different ways of being and different ways of interacting and different ways of understanding it as well.
When I went to Yemen, and you're studying there, you literally do not see another woman's face. So the first time I went is like 1.5 years. The only time I saw a woman's face was on, packet of soap or something on the side of a picture, literally. And, the women are completely segregate as much as possible. They have their own markets as well, times where they can go. And sometimes you take that and you think, because it's a religious environment as well, and you're studying, that this is the most correct way and most appropriate way. But when you realize after studying more, when I went to Syria, it was completely different. The women were in and out of mosques and teaching and everywhere. And sometimes people can take those cultural elements and view them as religiously mandated when they're not. And I'm not saying those things are wrong. It's good. It's extra precaution. And you'll find, scholars in the religious texts, they might encourage that as a means of extra precaution. But is it absolutely something that is an obligation for us to do? Okay, if we look at, the Prophet and his companions and how they interacted in the community, and there were women that came up to the Messenger of Allah, they asked him very, very personal questions. I said, our mother Aisha, she led an army into battle. She's like leading an army into battle on a camel, so I think it was very different. Obviously it was all with modesty and respectful as well. So I think, sometimes we take on these ideas and we view them as religiously mandated when actually it's just a part of that culture or an extra precaution.
What about with family members? I mean, we're all converts. We all have family members who are not Muslim. They might not get it. In my culture, at any rate, I don't know about everybody else's, but in my family's culture, cousins are considered like mahram because it's considered you don't marry your first cousin. Like that would just be, it's not quite illegal, but it's ick. So, having first cousins who are male, they're like siblings. And I think dealing with this is something that my family's used to it now. Obviously, it's been years, mashallah, but in the early days, for example, my cousin's husband, who's known me since I was 7 or 8 years old, he saw me for the first time after 15 years. He hugged me. I couldn't stop him. But he's also in his late 60s. So, it's sort of, there's an age thing there as well. But I sort of wonder, how do we deal with this with our families? How do we get our families used to this idea that, especially for sisters with hijab or the handshaking, the hugging and so on? I'd like to know how we've all dealt with that.
I'm in a predominantly female family, and so that's lucky, alhamdulillah. But I do have one male first cousin who's a lot younger than me. Not child, he's like early 20s, mid-20s, something like that. That's bad. And I still hug him. He hugs me. My family is a very, very close-knit, small family. It's not that we have, well, we do have loads and loads like second, third, fourth cousins and all that, as every Irish family does. But the actual close family within the Manchester area is quite small. And for me my family weren't always as relaxed with me being a Muslim as they are now. And certainly there's been no opportunity, or I wouldn't feel comfortable saying, I'm the same with everybody else, but you, as that one male individual in my family, don't touch me. We're not overly touchy anyway, but he'll just hug me to greet me when he sees me, which isn't even that often. And so I know that there's going to be people out there who are going to say, nope, doesn't matter. You should absolutely not allow him to hug you, and you should absolutely not hug him. But that is the compromise that I make to try and keep those ties with my family strong. And yeah, I don't go out of my way. I won't run up to him and give him a hug, but I would never stop him from briefly hugging me to say hello or goodbye. I just, at the moment, couldn't. Inshallah, maybe one day I'll get a little bit stronger with that. But for now, it's just not going to happen.
You hit the nail on the head there when you said that it's about keeping those relations with the family as well. And that's what I think it's just really important to do as well, because I think that's paramount as well. So when we see family members, the cousins and things like that, I've known them for years. I've got a lot of family in the Caribbean here. And like I say, I've got people that I've known for years as well, but they're huggy people. But it's just pure love and mahabbat amongst the community and the circle of friends. It's just pure love amongst them. And it's really hard to, it's genuine, it's genuine. And I think we've all got to that age now where it's not about, the teenage desires and young lust or anything like that, I suppose. But for us, we're at an age where it's about mutual respect as well. So when they hug, it's about respect, and they want to show that respect, and they actually genuinely love to see you as well. And I know that happens with my friends. So I keep that, and, I don't shun them away or anything like that. And it's a good thing, it is a good thing to do for us and within our community. I can definitely understand it from the Muslim paradigm, but within the non-Muslim family, I think that it is something that I keep. And I will maintain as well, just keeping those relations, keeping that respect as well. And we will hug and shake hands, and wherever we are, when we have get-togethers, barbecues or whatever we're doing, when I see them, oh, it's Ahmed, or the name that they used to have for me before I became a Muslim. And they'll run up and give me a hug. I'm hugging them. Of course I'm hugging them. Yeah, I'm keeping that. So yeah, it hasn't been that much of a challenge, because I think at first, difficulty around it. But at that time, I think, when I first became a Muslim, I think there was a little bit of ostracization. How should we interact with him? How should we? And all of that. There was that little bit. Then when I decided, look, I'm still the same person. You interact with me the same and stuff like that. There are certain things that I don't do or can't do. And then they learn from me. But I didn't want it to be too standoffish. I just still wanted to keep those hugs and those kisses on the cheeks and the shaking hands and stuff like that. Yeah, that still goes. So that's cool with me.
I've actually got a question that I want to ask Sheikh Bilal about this in terms of like Islamic rulings. So like if you've got a situation where, in some cultures, it's not allowed to marry your cousins, like in mine, we don't marry cousins. And it's scandalous if anyone does, right? Like people will be gossiping about it for generations. So is there any leeway in this sense of, because in that culture, they are mahram, they are forbidden to marry, even though we are Muslim and it's not, can we consider that they are because those people are considering it like that?
No, I don't think there's any leeway.
Okay.
It's something that I, struggle with as well, because Afro-Caribbean, families and culture, you've got to hug, man. And I've got dozens and dozens of cousins. We've got a big family on my mum's side and my dad's side as well. You know, and if I don't hug my cousin, I'm getting slapped off my auntie. So I usually don't initiate the hug, you know, but if they hug me, I'll just, so as long as there's no skin to skin contact, sometimes you get a kiss on the cheek and you can't do anything really. So if they want to hug me, that's fine, but I don't initiate it. If you can get out of it.
I think in this case, like for sisters who wear hijab, who wear a headscarf, we maybe have a bit of an advantage here because that sends a message. Like the first time I saw my cousins, I hadn't seen them for like 15 years. And because they all live in Western Canada and I was in the UK. And when my cousins who are women came over, and they're women, it doesn't matter. I don't have to wear my hijab. But then their husbands came over. And so I didn't say a word. I just ducked out and went put my hijab on and came back. And it was suddenly like, oh, it was like this light bulb went off, like, oh, she can't, oh, they're not. And it was like, oh, they understood suddenly. And the attempts at hugging got markedly decreased after that. So, you know, I think we do have this advantage that it does, you know, it's a big signal that, okay, there's a boundary here, you know, and I think maybe for brothers, it's a bit harder to do that, isn't it?
So it is really interesting because as we're talking here, I'm learning from the dynamics of what happens from a convert sister's perspective as well. So, you know, that is really interesting. That is kind of a signal to those who may want to, but think, should I back off because I got that hijab, or should I, you know what I mean? I didn't have that. I didn't always wear the attire. So I didn't have that clear indicator. People just knew that I was a Muslim and that's it.
But like, okay, so we all have different approaches. But even within the Muslim community, there's different approaches, right? Like you will find cultures like Sheikh Bilal, you were saying about in the South Asian culture, older women rubbing younger men's heads is totally fine. Is that an age thing? I mean, how do we understand this? Because, you know, I've heard things about once a woman passes the age of menopause, she doesn't have to be so careful and things like that, which to me is just, it's almost like, you know, okay, that's it. You're no longer entirely female, which is such a harsh message to be sending, but, you know, but I think, you know, okay, but as I am getting older, alhamdulillah, I sort of think, okay, do I have to be so strict? How do I understand this? Like, there's the Islamic, but then there's also the cultural, you know, yes, how have we all dealt with this and these different approaches while maintaining our own personal boundaries at the same time?
I suppose it would first, I mean, especially for those out there who are listening, who are brand new to this, I think it's really hard, definitely earlier on, but the more you get into it and the more experienced and confident you get in about being a Muslim and about navigating those communities, you sort of have to, or for me anyway, I try and think about, well, what is my boundary? What am I going to set my limits at? And then anything outside of that, I'm flexible and I'll try and be led as much as possible by the company I'm keeping or the scenario I'm going into. A bit like if you go into somebody else's house, I suppose, and you go into a house where the men have to sit in one living room and the women sit in another. That's not necessary for me. But I respect those that do that because that's how you feel comfortable within those rulings. And so I'll go along with that, no problem. Whereas going to someone's house where everybody's in one room and all lounging on sofas, well, I'm not sure that I feel comfortable with that, actually. I don't mind sitting at a dinner table where it's slightly more formal, but I'm not going to be lying on a sofa in a room with a man that I'm not married to. And I suppose that's or even on a sofa opposite, like not necessarily on the same sofa, but just in the same room. I just think that environment is far too informal for me. That's my boundary. Whereas a dinner table, more than happy with that. Separate rooms, personally for me, not necessary, but I'll go along with it because that's me coming into your home. But I've pre-thought about that before I come so that I can work out at what point do I feel comfortable and at what point don't I. But that takes a little bit of experience and confidence, I think. What does everybody else think?
Yeah, I think I like the idea. I love the fact that there are various approaches within the Muslim community to this, because then, you know, I go with the one that I suppose more so suits me. And there isn't just one. So if I was to take the Indo-Pak community and how they do things, I respect it, but I'm learning at the same time in the way that they do their thing, and I partake in it and enjoy it. I wouldn't say that is something that within my household that I would emulate. It would probably be something different, but I respect theirs. And when I are invited to their house or something like that, then yeah, if I struggle with the sitting on the floor, though, I do struggle with sitting on the floor. My knees hurt me bad. I don't know if it's the years of football taking its toll or what, but my knees hurt me bad. And so I struggle with that. I would much prefer to sit in a chair or sit on the table or something like that. So I do prefer that. Within the African community, I think I kind of like that. There is still the separation, which is fine and stuff like that. But I do like the when we're eating together, I do like the idea of usually sometimes they bring a ball out and all the men just eat from this thing, and I really love that. I just love that sense of community and all of us together and doing that kind of thing. So I kind of like that as well. I like some of the ideas. So I like the various approaches, and I take little bits from all of them, and ones that suit me and I'm comfortable with, and I just sit with that, and I keep on that with that, if you will, and I try to emulate little bits of those different traditions. And that's just the value of the breadth of Islam, how it's so broad, and we've got different interpretations, different understanding, and different cultures, so we can take what we want from them and emulate them as well, and sit with the ones that are sort of we feel more comfortable with as well. So I do like that as well, and I think that we would also bring some of our own cultural identities as well, whether it be Irish, whether it be English or something like that, and how we sort of address these things and how we approach these things, and we bring that into the culture as well, so that the next generation would have a sort of wealth of informed sort of a well-bodied idea of different cultures, different ideas, and how we present these different etiquettes within the communities as well. But it's got little bits from every culture or every parts of the world, if you will. So yeah, I just sit with what's more comfortable with me, and I kind of go with that, really. So it's not just one, it's many. So I prefer that approach.
Bilal, I think you were going to say something when I was talking about the age issue.
Yeah, it has been mentioned in the text of some scholars that when we reaches a certain age, then, the skin's kind of shaking hands and these type of interactions. So what they say is that as long as there isn't any shahwa, which is a term used for like sexual desire. So as long as they're shaking hands and she's elderly and there's no sexual desire from either side, then they do allow it. So there's flexibility. It also goes back to modesty and, like we said, politeness and, the respect. Again, that's what Islam is looking for. Yeah.
Bilal, does that, when we were just talking with the sister, Amanda just mentioned about the age thing, does that mean that it's obvious that from where that's come from was a society that viewed that when women get to a particular age that they're no longer attractive? So is that something that needs to be replicated here? Or can we just let that go? Because if somebody wants to be with somebody, regardless of their age, they can be, can't they? And they don't need to view them or look at that viewpoint, because that seems to be from a particular time and that's how they viewed it, and that culture viewed women like that. Do we need to replicate that?
I was just going to ask the same question, because I think, with the society back then, if a woman got to the age where she was past childbearing years, that was pretty much the end of her life. Whereas nowadays you have women, we're living till our 80s and 90s and beyond, mashallah, and we're still pretty young when we're 50. At least I think we are. So, but we look younger too. And different countries, I'm just thinking, I know several sisters who have come to the UK to live. They've come from countries where life has been harsh. And at 40, they consider themselves old. Whereas when I was 40, it was like, old? Are you kidding? I've still got years ahead of me, inshallah.
Yeah. So the ruling isn't really connected to menopause, and it's not women specific as well. So they'll say it's the same for an old man as well. I did just mention an elderly man and an elderly woman. If they reach that age of elderliness and there's no sexual desire involved in the skin contact, then it will be overlooked. Even then, the majority of scholars will say no. It's there's a prohibition regardless of the age. And they've taken it from that verse, say to the believing men to lower their gazes, okay, and protect their private, and say to the believing women to lower their gazes. So, if we've been commanded to lower our gaze and be modest with the opposite gender, by extension, touching somebody that is not a relative or you're not married to is even more required. So that's where that ruling comes from.
Okay. So would you say common sense prevails within those situations then, basically?
I don't know. I think modesty, adhere to the rules of modesty and respect. That's the most important thing.
Would you say that this idea of who is elderly would depend on the society and the time as well?
It could do. It's not something set in stone.
Mm.
Yeah. And even some contemporary scholars, they've just extended it as a general ruling. So they're saying as long as there isn't any sexual desire between a man and woman, regardless of the age, based on that understanding, then it's just things like shaking hands, it's not a problem whatsoever. So that's more of a contemporary opinion. Okay. Make of it what you will.
Okay, so one last question to everybody. How would we all advise new converts to deal with this topic? I think we've talked quite a bit about how we have dealt with it. I don't necessarily think the way I dealt with it was the best way. So learning from whether you think how you dealt with it was good and you want to promote that idea, or what have you learned from how you dealt with it? How would you advise new converts?
I don't know. I suppose it's difficult, isn't it? Because I think one common thing that we've all had agreed between us is that it's complex and that there's a lot of flexibility in it, whilst understanding, I suppose the first thing I would say is understand the basics and don't be afraid to ask questions. I think one thing I'm probably guilty of a lot of the time is asking too many questions or lots of questions, because I genuinely want to understand where someone's coming from with something. Is it religion? Is it your culture? I respect it either way, but it helps me move forward with something, or know whether to adopt it or try and adopt it, at least if it's from the religion. But if it's culture, cool, I'll respect it because that's your culture, but I need to understand what this particular scenario or way of dealing with something is. And the other side of that, I suppose, is don't be too offended if they shouldn't correct you harshly, but sometimes it's out of immediate shock of a scenario, like if you go to throw your arms around a brother by accident, that you shouldn't, then he may immediately, but don't be offended, like it's okay, just maybe use it as an opportunity to learn, apologize, or ask questions and say, sorry, I didn't understand, is this something that's from the religion or is this culture? So I suppose I would put this up there with one of the most difficult things to navigate, along with identity crisis and imposter syndrome. How to navigate this is up there with probably some of the hardest stuff, because you're vulnerable, it's out there. A lot of the other things that we deal with are internal and private, a lot like our prayer and physical hijab. A lot of that is personal and private. These other things involve other people, and so arguably it's up there with the hardest to navigate, maybe. And so just stay open-minded would probably be my best advice, but I don't even know if that's good advice. It's hard to know, isn't it, without knowing what the scenarios people are walking into.
I think for me, I would advise that anybody just checks out the scenario or the environment that they're in and respond accordingly to that environment as well. If you see that's not the norm amongst that community, then you don't do, you follow, or you do as the Romans would do, if you will, as I say. But I would also ultimately have respect and reverence for every individual that you would have. And I think a lot of us do have it. And me coming from a Methodist background, church background, we've always been taught respect, and some of those will permeate the actions that I still do today, whether or not they're within Islam or whether outside of Islam. But it's about having that modesty, and it's about having that respect for that individual as well. So, but if the area or the scenario that you're in don't allow you to do that, don't take offense from the way that they do it. It's just that they are showing respect in a different way. And this is an opportunity for you to learn their custom and their cultural viewpoints. It's not that yours are bad. It's just that it's just not the time and the place for it. So you just got to learn and accommodate to the situation, acclimatize to the situation that you're in. And if they're doing it in a different way, it just doesn't mean respect. It just means respect in a different format. I think that would be the best advice. Just check the environment that you're in and acclimatize to the situation that they're in and show respect accordingly. And but there will be a time for you to show the respect in the way that you wish to show it.
But I would add not to make assumptions as well. So if you are, experiencing certain practices in relation to gender interactions and your Muslim community is a particular community or from a particular culture, then don't assume that that's the only way of doing things, and don't assume that this is religiously mandated as well, because it's not always the case. So don't take that on board that this is how Islam must be because everyone in my community is doing it this way. It might not always be the case. It might be, but it might be wrong as well. So don't make assumptions, but be respectful as well, like Brother Ahmed said, and know that there are different opinions usually about these matters, and don't get offended if you get told off for doing the wrong thing.
I think that we've got an underlying theme of don't get offended. That is a thing that happens a lot because people can be well-meaning, but their advice can come across as harsh. But on the flip side of that, and I don't know, maybe this is particular to white converts, but I've seen a tendency to maintain a cultural superiority even after conversion amongst a few white British converts who I know, who they see everything that they disagree with as just being strange. And I think the respect isn't just for people and their boundaries, but also for the fact that we're going to be interacting with a whole bunch of cultures that we've never come across before, maybe, especially if we've come from insular backgrounds. Be open-minded about it. But I think probably the best advice I would have, and this is something that I wish I had back in the day, was find yourself a convert who's been a Muslim for a long time, who can mentor you, who you can sound things off with, who you can ring up and say, I've just encountered this. What on earth is going on? How do I deal with it? Because they'll be able to advise you because they've done it and they've been there, and you can learn from their experience as well. And not just for this issue, like Zahra was saying, there's so many different issues, but this is one of the most complex. But for any kind of issue you can try and find somebody, even if it's just somebody online who you WhatsApp every now and again. For me, if I had that back in the day, and alhamdulillah and everything, but it would have made the journey so much smoother, I think, to learn from people who have gone before.
Just to add to that, Amanda, I think you give some really good advice there, coming from your perspective, your dynamics, the fact that you're a white convert as well. And I thank you for that. Honestly, it's brilliant that you've actually brought that forward for others to learn from as well. But I'm just going to add to what you said there, that to be able to get advice from somebody who has been a Muslim for a long time, I would say that somebody also who has had a sort of broad-minded understanding, because we've come across some that get stuck in the ways.
Oh yeah, that's very true. Yeah,
you know what I mean. So it'd be really good if they've got some sort of a nuanced understanding, a bit of a balanced understanding, or maybe have some insight to different opinions and things like that. And somebody you can actually talk to, because we do know that there are some that are stuck in the ways for like years and years. So this
is actually something, I'm gonna plug my own project right now. This is something we do in Cardiff. We have like a team of people who have been, most of them are, I think all but one are converts. We've all been doing this for years, and we sort of all gotten together and said, let's help out people who are new, because we could see that this was something needed. And so we do this, we do mentor new people, but it's very much mentee led. We're not training anyone. We're not teaching anyone. Not qualified to teach anyone. We're not coaching anyone, but when they have questions, they come to us, and we all vet each other and stuff, so we know that we're that type of person, the open-minded, we're flexible in our approach. We're not going to be imposing one way of doing things on people. And, I'm sure there are other organizations all around the UK, not least of all New Beginnings, who would be able to do something like this or be able to recommend people as well. But yeah, I do think the cultural thing, I mean, listening to yourself, Brother Ahmed, and Bilal talking about, the respect in the Afro-Caribbean culture, this was something that, white Western culture is very individualistic. There is a massive difference there. And I think we have to appreciate that too. Where are converts coming from? Because converts from certain backgrounds will automatically understand some things, and from other backgrounds, it'll just be alien. And we have to respect that experience in them as well. How are they coming at it, and how is it going to impact them too? And we can't do that if we don't share our experiences with each other. I think this is, I always love coming on and talking to people and, mashallah, listening to different people's opinions and ideas, and we always run out of time. But I want to say thank you to you both for coming on and ask, are there any last comments you'd like to make before we sign off?
I don't have any personally. I just would like to say thank you. It's been really insightful, and it's glad that after so many years of coming to Muslim that we've got to this stage, that we've been able to set up a platform where people who may convert, who want to learn about Islam, but they've got a source there that they can just go online and they can just listen to this and think, this is how I may be able to navigate it. This is how they navigated it. This is how they dealt with that situation on various topics. So I'm really glad that I've been a part of that. And so this is my, part of it. So thank you for that. And may Allah bless you with new beginnings and what you continue to do and all your endeavors. So thank you for that.
Ameen. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you for having me on. It's been a really interesting conversation. I'll definitely go away and think about it a little bit more, no doubt. And I suppose the only final comment would be to seek out as many different opinions as you can and find where within that very broad spectrum on any topic you feel the most comfortable to sit, and be prepared for the fact that it may change, because we all move up and down on that spectrum on every single topic within Islam throughout our journey, backwards and forwards, and all of it is okay because it's your journey.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to you both for coming on and for sharing your experiences with us. I've really loved hearing these different points of view. If you have any questions or comments, or if you'd like to learn more about the issues we've discussed today, then just drop us an email on unplugged@beginnings.org.uk. That's unplugged@beginnings.org.uk. That's it for another episode of the New Beginnings podcast. We do hope you enjoyed this episode. Please share on social media and with family and friends. Yes, please do share and subscribe. We're on all major podcast platforms. Inshallah, we'll see you next time. I look forward to it, but for now, thank you for listening. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.